Good morning, everyone. I am Jeffrey Moss, the founder and CEO of Parker Dewey. Very excited to be here today for our quarterly State of Campus Recruiting event. I'm joined by my colleague, Kristen Schrader. And I really love this quarter's session because as folks who have been with us for a while know, every year we do a student sentiment survey where we go to the students and recent graduates on campus and ask them what they think about recruiting, how the past year's process has been, what things they'd like to see going forward. And I love seeing the data when we do these reports because data goes beyond the anecdotes. It gives real insights in a way that it's fundamentally different from when I went to school or Kristen or many of us went to college. And as Kristen will share in a minute, one of the other things I like is the data captures a breadth of perspectives across schools, majors, backgrounds. But one of the things that's interesting from past reports and continues to be true today is that even with the breadth of perspectives, there's a ton of consistency. Students really want the same things, irrespective of where they go to school or where they came from. As always, this year's survey is a bit different than last year's survey. Each year we look at the data that Parker Dewey collects, and the team here tries to find insights that we want to dive deeper on. There's always questions or comments in the free text section where students share things, and it makes us think about other questions we want to ask. And as a result, this year there's a lot more focus on getting into the students' minds and preferences on what they actually want versus it being looking in the rearview mirror exclusively and looking at what events they went to or what types of things they did. Now, as always, please add questions or comments in the chat. We'll try to get to them throughout the session. We'll certainly leave time at the end for questions. My colleague, Lindsay, I think is manning the chat and will try to respond real time. In addition, the session's being recorded as always. We'll be sharing the full report, slides, and the summary afterwards. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Kristen, to kick us off.
Thank you, Jeffrey, and so excited, as always, to share this information with you all. And not only because this is an eclectic group of an eclectic audience. We've got folks here who are working directly with students in a college, university, nonprofit organization, maybe a workforce organization, as well as those of you who work in HR trying to recruit those students. And so we're really excited to be able to bring some of these meaningful and actionable insights to you all. As I think about, my own journey to this space of being able to talk with you all today, I think we all kind of share a common bond. I worked in HR as well as in career services. And, the commonality is that we're all trying to help either recruit the best talent or support those folks in trying to make a well-informed, great decision about what do they want to do with their 8 to 5 or whatever hours that they work, or and just to make sure that it's as meaningful to them and a good experience as possible. I mean, when I think about my own journey into higher ed, helping students figure out what they want to do and how they got there, that's exactly what excites me about not only just my career day in, day out, but also why I'm excited to share these insights with you all. In my role here at Parker Dewey, I have the opportunity to hear directly from hundreds of colleges and universities, nonprofit organizations, workforce organizations, who all want to help these early career professionals, these students that we had the privilege of surveying here, to launch their careers. And what I think is really important to note about this particular cohort of students, and you can see the data on who these folks were, is that these students, by and large, have had a very disrupted educational experience. For those who graduated, many of them started in fall of 2020. I'm sure if you've heard commencement speeches over the past few weeks, or maybe you will, that's probably going to be part of that story. That's a critical piece to remember, that 4 years ago and plus is when all of that craziness began of just a really disrupted experience. And so I want to keep that in mind because I do think that informs who our audience is for these students. But also it's something that I've noticed in the almost 2 decades of working in this space of trying to help folks launch their careers. It's the playbooks, they haven't changed all that much. And so what I think is interesting is in the time of disruption, it's also important to recognize, there's a lot of tried and true techniques, but are they what the students want? And that's, I think, again, what we're really going to be focusing on today. So with that, some of our takeaways that you'll hear more about that we'll dig into one by one is, first of all, first and second year, freshman and sophomore, critical times. And too often, I think about my own experience working as a recruiter, the line when you're talking to these students is, sorry, I don't have much to share with you. Come back next year. Come back when you have more, in your junior year, senior year, etc. So that's, again, something that doesn't really align with what the students are saying in terms of how they want to engage. And similarly, students are really excited to learn about things that are unfamiliar to them, whether that be a career path, company, industry, etc. But they are a bit hindered by traditional recruiting practices and processes. And we'll talk again more about that. And if you think again, how many of us knew what we wanted to do when we were going through our post-secondary education? Many careers have been created since we all went to school. How do you expose these students to those types of opportunities? Third point, students want to demonstrate their full range of skills. Because think of all of us who've seen probably thousands of resumes, probably millions with the representation we have on today's call. How many of those give a full picture of what a student is truly capable of? Same with cover letters, same with interviews. Do we really have an aggregate perspective of what the student can do? Well, they've told us what they want to do. They want to get that real world experience. And we'll talk about different ways and methods and modalities for doing that. But I do want to emphasize the piece about real. Students want that authenticity. They started school online in most cases for this cohort. So they want to know what it's like to be working with a real human being on the other end. And that's something, and they want to know that whatever they're doing, that it matters, that it's something that a real individual is going to see. So that real piece, again, we'll talk more about. And then lastly, that flexibility, fair pay. We've all seen that that's not a pipe dream. Most of us work remotely or may still are working remotely. And so how do you do that at an early stage career? Not to say that that's the only way students want to remote, but that's something that many, many, many really value. And that's a strategic advantage for those companies that have come up with creative ways to bring that flexibility and that fair pay, don't want to diminish that, into their recruiting models. So excited to share and dig into some of these first data points. So Jeffrey, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think let's start with the early interest. Because I know I talk with a lot of companies. Again, the way Kristen spends so much time talking with universities and colleges and workforce programs and other training programs, I spend a lot of time talking with companies as well. And so many of them are focused on early identification and early access programs. They're continuing to recognize that by the time most students are juniors or seniors, they've likely made up their mind. They've picked a career path. They've decided what companies or industries they want to be in. Now, what's really good, though, for those employers is the fact that 64% of students said they began considering future career plans during their first or second year of school. And an even greater percentage highlighted that they wanted to begin earlier, but weren't able to. And that's for a variety of reasons. And again, next year, I know that's something we want to dig into a lot more. But from reading the comments, one of the things that really jumped out at me was that beyond the level of interest the students had was feedback from the students on the experience for those who were beginning to explore during the first or second year. It was something we didn't ask in a way to, again, get those metrics, which I'm excited to do more. But the volume of the comments on this topic was pretty incredible and enlightening. A lot of the comments were really focused on how early access programs that companies were offering were really focused on those students who had already made up their mind. Think about the hackathons that are being done for IT students who know they want to go into coding, or the weekend or summer events for students who want to go into finance or consulting. Again, a lot of companies are doing that, and they're incredibly good for those students who already know. But when you have so many students who are still unsure during first or second year, it's tough. And there's this expectation, said or not, that the students want to be in the space. The other thing that's really important is a lot of those early access events are not accessible. Again, a comment that came up in several students' responses were case competitions. They're useful, but they require massive time commitments, and they're tough for students who have part-time jobs or athletes or other obligations. The other thing that was interesting that we heard, and Kristen alluded to it earlier, was that a lot of the students who were going to career fairs and info sessions, when they were actually talking with those companies, they'd hear comments like, we don't have opportunities for first or second year students. Visit the website and apply when you're a junior or senior. And that's one of the things that's a huge opportunity, we think, for companies. Think about the time, the money, the effort spent going to campus, building those relationships, driving engagement, and you have these first and second year students who are engaged and have interest. There's a huge opportunity to keep them warm. And it needs to go beyond sending the emails and inviting them to more events. They're really interested in learning more, but we've seen the data and the research showing that a lot of students aren't reading those emails. It's hard to get through the noise. The level of interest is also a great segue to the next topic, which is the students' interest in exploration. So beyond the fact that so many students are interested in beginning their career journey first or second year, one of the things we hear is from the underclassmen, again, in the early phases of career exploration, or the junior looking for the right summer internship or senior looking for the right role, students are very, very open to learning about various industries, companies, and roles. I think about my time as an accounting student. Came in freshman year as an accounting major. I joined all the clubs. I went to early access events. I remember Arthur Anderson, for those of you who remember them, used to host an event in St. Charles for those of us interested in accounting. So again, even I as a student that was highly interested in accounting, during the first week of my summer internship, I realized it wasn't the right fit. And what that meant is, again, I began my journey almost from start or from scratch as a senior. What we found is students are hungry for that exploration. They want to do it early, but they want to do it at all levels. And again, by the time someone's a summer intern, it's kind of too late. Again, I realized the fit wasn't the right fit for me, and it was kind of a lost opportunity for me, but also on the company. It took away a spot for one of those students that could have been a summer intern or potentially a full-time hire. Beyond impacting the students, this does have a massive impact on the companies as well. For small companies, how do you build that reputation and build that brand with students who never heard of you before, or even Fortune 500 companies? I know we've been joined in the past by companies like Xylem or Train Technologies, massive organizations, but college students haven't heard their name. How can you get they're interested in learning about you, but how can you actually engage when they're walking by a booth or, again, haven't heard the name? What we've also heard is well-known companies have this issue as well. The student who knows Nike, but doesn't realize there's roles in data analytics. Or as Jackson from HCA talked about at last quarter's State of Campus recruiting event, HCA is actively recruiting for roles that are not clinical, but students aren't applying because they're not thinking about it. They don't realize it. Healthcare in particular, I want to call out because one of the things we found in the report were the top 3 industries where students had interest and some of the industries where students right now did not have interest. And healthcare was one of those top 3. And again, you can read the details in the full report. What we found is that students are interested in healthcare, again, especially for clinical roles. But what we also found was that students are less likely to apply for roles in manufacturing and hospitality. That was what they said, but it was only based upon preconceived notions of the role. Once they realized that Train had roles in finance or accounting or HR, roles that weren't on the manufacturing floor, they became very interested. And this is not a hypothesis. We have the data over the past almost decade to back this up. And we're hearing directly from the students and employers that they want to do these roles. They want to learn about different industries, but they need a way to get through the noise. And as Kristen talked about earlier, I mean, her experience starting off, I don't think she was thinking about joining the automotive space. I mean, did you want to add something, Kristen?
Yeah, I mean, my So my alma mater, I was a business student as well, and some of the nicest buildings on campus, this was a while ago, but were the business school. And I had these nice cushy chairs, they're the envy of the engineering students across the street and so on. But I definitely did not envision myself when I would transition, into my internship and then full-time role in manufacturing, hard hat and getting stuff all over my clothes every day and all of that, and eventually earplugs and a hairnet. But it was a fantastic place that I just lucked out, but I stumbled into, but a great place to learn human resources, which is what I wanted to do. And again, I got really, really lucky, but certainly did not envision myself in those spaces, when you're in the beautiful facilities that college campuses often have.
Yeah. And again, that's really a key takeaway from this. Students want to explore, they want to learn about companies, they want to make sure it's the right fit. 55% of recent college grads leave their first job within the first year. And within that data, a lot of it is because the student just didn't know. They didn't know what the role was going to be. They had preconceived notions, or the employer realizes it's not the right fit. The more that can be done to engage and build that relationship earlier, the better for everyone. Once students are in the process, we ask questions about how they felt about it. This was, again, an area we wanted to dive into a lot more based upon data from last year, but we also didn't want to just do the dive on sort of, do you like career fairs? What do you think about info sessions? We really wanted to dive in a lot more to understand how they felt about the process assessing their skills. It's also not based just upon last year's data, but a lot of discussions we've had with employers and a lot of the discussion taking place out there about degree versus credential and skills-based hiring and all of these other buzzwords. In short, as the data shows, students don't feel that the quote unquote typical recruiting process allows them to effectively demonstrate their skills. Now, of course, some of this is just the student perception, but it does have a real impact on the employers. So beyond the impact on the employer brand, think about the 30% of students who don't feel like the interview effectively shows their skills. This really hurts employers because we've all hired people who interview really well, who we thought they did a great job showing their skills. They did, and then they start the role, and you realize it's not the right fit. Or think back to, again, when you were in college, as Kristen said, like, did you really feel like your resume or your transcript when you were in college effectively conveyed your skills? What also jumped out at me is there's so much discussion, as I mentioned, on skills-based hiring right now. A lot of times that discussion is focused on recruiting those without degrees and looking beyond the credential, but skills-based hiring has a massive impact and opportunity when companies and employers are recruiting for all roles. So while the students don't feel like they're effectively demonstrating their skills, I bet a lot of the employers on the call also feel like it's difficult to assess the skills from those processes. What that means when you're using a skills-based hiring approach is you can hire those students who might otherwise get missed. You can better assess the fit and ultimately drive better outcomes, And with the students so interested in opportunities to demonstrate their skills. I mean, 92% said the best way for me to demonstrate my skills is give me a real professional project. Let me show my stuff. Students are hungry for this. And what that means is it's easy for employers to harness the benefit of skills-based hiring.
Yeah, and I think that's a really great point. I also want to put a button on, like, there was a great comment in the chat that it's outcomes based hiring. Exactly. And there are a lot of great outcomes that folks are seeing. But I also want to just again highlight the diversity of the students who responded to the survey. They're giving us this data. This is including four-year traditional age type college students at brick and mortar institutions nationwide, but it's also including folks at two-year colleges, folks who are pursuing non-traditional types of degree programs. And so if those of you interested in, and again, I'm speaking to the HR folks on the call, interested in recruiting roles and attracting a population that is maybe underrepresented in the workforce, maybe you have some roles that have been particularly challenging to fill, the skills-based hiring piece is really critical. because oftentimes it's the methodology of how to engage these non-traditional learners that could be the next grade higher, but are just being missed because of the methodology of being able to attract and engage them, not giving them the opportunity to really showcase those skills that they want to do. And I think the cover letter, the resume, the interview, having again not only seen lots of those, but coached lots and lots of students, as many of you have, in how to make your resume and all those, how to make it as polished as possible. I have to say, if the students do what you tell them to do, career services friends, their resume is going to look good. And I know you all, again, having worked with so many of you, you are outstanding at your job. Now, whether the students listen to you, another conversation, and that's shame on them if they don't, but they're gonna look good. If they go to career services, they have their resume put together, they have done a good job in their cover letter, they've gotten some interview coaching and all of those wonderful services. And so what's challenging is then how does a student further differentiate themselves? If they're just seen on paper, the resume, the interview, etc., how do they, and internships, especially if they're not required, are not going to be, that are required, those are not going to be that differentiator. Because those of you, and I applaud all of the higher education institutions that are mandating internships, I think that's great to ensure that students do have access, but that's not going to necessarily be that e-ticket or that golden opportunity for the students to showcase that they really are that differentiator, because everybody else is going to do it. Everybody's still going to look the same. And then other types of experiential learning, think about your case studies, your opportunities that are embedded in the courses. Again, not the differentiator, but the other things, the boot camps, etc. Those are oftentimes, as Jeffrey alluded before, not necessarily as accessible, as realistic, as attainable for those students. So, and the students, again, they want to be able to engage. So how do you do it? Well, what we find is that the short-term real professional projects, particularly if it's paid, is critical because it does allow that accessibility for all. And then similarly, we find that these can have a massive impact on the student's readiness for something else longer term. We're not suggesting that these short-term projects are the golden ticket for all, and that it's going to be something that is the only thing a student should do. But as a stepping stone, fantastic. And for many students, this is the only stepping stone that's truly accessible for them to be able to differentiate themselves. And so those of you who are familiar with the NACE career readiness competencies, I do want to highlight this data, and I'll put the link so that if you want to dig in further, there's some more information about this if that's helpful or of interest. But what we're finding is that to make a meaningful impact on students, they don't have to do that full semester internship. It's great if they can, but those short-term projects, and by short-term, again, 10 to 40 hours is the typical duration that we're seeing with these projects. It's making improvement in most of these areas. In fact, almost 99% of students said that they've either improved or built confidence in at least one of these competencies, and 87% in 3 or more. That's phenomenal results for just a short-term project that they could potentially do over the course of a week or two. And I do, again, want to put a particular, Jeffrey, go back to this previous slide.
Sorry.
I do want to put a big pin on that no change, but I build confidence piece. Because that is something that, particularly for populations that are underrepresented in the workforce, for students who are first or second year students, who are first generation students, for those that just need some experience in their target field to make it be that stepping stone for them. That's the impact of these short-term professional projects that we're really, again, seeing, and we get really excited about making a meaningful impact so that it can be something that they say, yep, I can do this, and then go on and do that full-time summer internship or have more confidence when it comes to competing for that full-time role that they are really targeting.
Now, can I move ahead?
Please. And then, something else that, again, we are really, really, I think is important to recognize is that the hiring process itself, it's not just about gaining experience, but how these short-term projects can be that gateway, that pipeline for companies, but it's helpful for students to get more data about what is truly going to be a fit, so that when they comes to hiring, they're ready, that they feel confident, that they know that they're making the right decision for them. And part of our survey highlighted what factors students want to know or at least understand before they even apply. Some of this is important takeaways. Some of it may be a little less realistic, but just again, this is what the students are telling us. They want to know the skills needed to perform in the role so that they can understand, is whatever I'm studying, whatever extra things that I'm doing, whatever I'm learning in my academic portfolio, are they aligning with what I want to do? They want to know salary. They want to know benefits. And again, this is where I know various company policies, et cetera. I worked in HR, know how challenging some of that can be. And I know there's also legislation. It's different places across the country where some of that is becoming more and more transparent. But again, this is what students have said they want to know. They want to know those role responsibilities, to understand what are they going to be required to do, what are their goals, what are the data points, KPIs, et cetera, that they're going to be held responsible for. And then number 4, no surprise, has been like this since the beginning of time. They want to know about growth opportunities, which is great. We want to hire students who are ambitious and want to move on into whatever that career pathway and pipeline might look like. Now, the other things that they're telling us, though, is what's most likely going to make them feel confident in accepting a role. They want to know a recruiting process that is really, really going to respect their time, that's going to give them that flexibility to gain experience without, in conjunction with everything else that they have going on. And I want to highlight the student's quote that's on the slide for a moment. This is a student athlete who found, water polo didn't leave much room for career exploration. I had a college roommate who was a track and field athlete, and she's running 6 hours a day all year long. That doesn't leave a lot of time to do other things. And in Alex's case, it wasn't until their junior year that they realized the importance of internships. And how many student athletes, it's not even until senior year or maybe even after they've graduated, because they're just so busy. That was the case for my college roommate. And so thinking about what kinds of opportunities do we need to offer to students to make it so that it's flexible, that it still allows them to be able to engage. And know that they want to understand how they should be developing their skills and how they'll continue to develop their skills if they choose your organization to be able to join upon graduation. And then they want to build those professional relationships. They don't want this to be a simulated experience. They don't want this to be yet another case study. And when I was in college, it was the Harvard Business Review case studies. Those are great. You learn a lot, but they're not real. They don't allow me to directly interface with the Southwest Airlines of the world or with the Pepsi companies or whatever company that we were profiled. And were those specifically, I would have loved to have talked to an HR person in those companies, but it didn't offer that experience. What can offer you experience, again, are those short-term paid projects that, again, is accessible. And then they want to have an opportunity for that direct work experience to really not only do a project, but have it be something that's meaningful, that really allows them to engage, and that gives them that resumeable experience. And so thinking about, again, some of those data points, again, that students are really, really looking for, some factors that they're not looking for, that they're telling us, deterrence, if you will. So 51% said on-site. 49% if it's unpaid or underpaid, 45% strict availability requirements. So, that's speaking to and screaming the importance of flexibility. The student that's quoted here, financial capacity to being able to move to a major city where internships may be easier, that student couldn't do it. And how many of our students lack transportation, even to be able to get across town for your particular city, wherever your institution might be located, let alone having to relocate in order to pursue an internship. I know for my situation there, that restricted my choice. And I specifically chose companies and opportunities for summer internships where I already was paying rent, so I wouldn't have to figure out how to find a subletter and all those different things. Now, to be clear, students also said that they don't want experiences to be 100% remote, particularly those full-time opportunities. Again, they want that direct engagement, but they want flexibility. And so whenever you can build that into the full-time opportunities and to some extent the internships, the more attractive that's going to be to these students. The other thing I want to also think about, though, and encourage is creativity around the hiring process in general. And I want to shout out the amazing team at Smith Nephew that's created a really innovative way to recruit students in a way that from day one, as soon as they engage these students, they are keeping in mind what students want. Here's the playbook, folks. This company was saying they need help hiring for full-time business development roles. They had a rotational development program. They went to college campuses. They had their targets, and they filled most of their seats via that method. Great. But to fill in some additional seats and to also identify students that weren't at their target campuses, they created a really innovative strategy where they had a paid project. They opened it up to students nationwide, where it specifically said, we are interested in engaging students for our full-time business development, rotational development program. Great, it's transparent in front of the students from the get-go. And they recruited across the country. Now with this particular project, 8-10-hour project, really, really short term, but the project was do research on one of our products and build a sales pitch for that and deliver it. So students could be from anywhere. So geographically, they were paid for that experience. So those students who couldn't take time off to come to a career fair, again, it was very accessible. They could do it at whatever hours worked best for them to be able to engage. And the company hired, I don't know, Jeff, do you remember 20, 30 students for that particular project, something like that?
Yeah, it was a big number. And again, it was neat because a lot of students talked about the fact I had never heard the Smith Nephew or wasn't thinking about the medical device space. And then there were students studying mechanical engineering who weren't thinking about roles in sales. They thought they wanted to be an engineer. They got the technical skills, and some of them had done internships that were in the lab setting and realized it wasn't the right fit. Again, it's a great example of a win-win. And this is something that we're happy to share it because Smith and Nephew has publicly talked about it. They've highlighted this, they've shared it, they showcased it, they did a case study on it because it was truly one of the internally recognized innovation efforts within this global company. So again, we're proud of it. Sorry to interrupt, Kristen.
No, not at all. And yeah, again, I put the case study in case that's helpful for folks because it's, again, just a poster child of giving students what they want and engaging students irrespective of geography, but also being transparent from the get-go of, hey, we're looking for the full-time students for this particular example. But that model I know they've also used at career fairs where it's, hey, this is a way to bring students to attract them to our table. Students that, again, may not know anything about medical devices, but are really excited to work on these short-term projects.
Thanks very much. Yeah, I mean, that's a great example. I completely forgot about the NSBE situation last year. I don't know, for those of you on the employer side who have gone to NSBE and know what sort of a massive and amazing career fair event that is, what they were finding is, one, how do we drive interest in students who haven't heard of us before? So they were promoting these micro internships beforehand on social media and other ways to drive visits to the booth. And then when they were at the booth, they had special projects just being given to the attendees of NSBE. So the student who was a junior who already took their summer internship and wasn't really looking for a summer internship for this year, they could still do micro internships. It was a great way to keep them warm. And for the underclassmen, again, a great way to start to build those relationships and do the mutual assess. And that's something I want to make sure I'm hitting on as I look at the chat and think about something, Kristen, you said before. I think it's not about mutually exclusive. It's not about don't go to career fairs or throw out the early access programs or stop interviewing. It's about how these pieces work together. How, when you're visiting those career fairs, using these projects as a tool to entice and engage. How, when you're doing well-structured outcome-based or behavioral interviews, how when students have these experiences, it's more meat on the bones for you and for them. It allows that mutual understanding of fit. The other thing I want to dig into or highlight, Kristen, is when you were talking about remote work. again, the irony is since founding Parker Dewey almost a decade ago, was it 97, 98, 99% of the micro internships were remote even before COVID. But we were always 100% supportive of the on-site 10-week summer internship, the on-site full-time role. And what we're hearing from the students is they want flexibility when they take that full-time role. They want to know that if they have a doctor appointment or a family commitment, they can work from home and the company sort of is going to be okay with that. But they're also saying, I want to be on site. They don't want remote only full-time roles. They want the mentoring and the coaching and the mentorship that comes from being on site. They want the interaction with other departments. So yes, we think that using remote recruiting methodologies can be a valuable tool in the toolkit, but not a replacement. The other reason they're so important is students continue to say, I want authentic engagement and real sort of 3D connection with hiring managers and recruiters, which is why, again, on-site career fairs are much more effective than virtual ones because they're building that. But they want the connection to be more than just those insights, as one of the students said on an earlier slide, more than just those insights they can read from a company's website. And it's one of the reasons why, and again, micro internships meet the student preferences. And I know Kristen touched on them before, and I'd be remiss if we didn't ask the students in the survey, how do they want to be recruited? And not surprisingly, the vast majority, you can see the numbers here, say this is how we want to be recruited. We want to be given real paid professional projects. We want to demonstrate our skills. We want to learn about the organization. We want to build our networks. It's also worth noting that when I use the term micro internships, it's not about Parker Dewey, but it's about the concept of a micro internship, but I'm defining it very specifically because we are seeing the term used a lot more broadly, which is wonderful. When we define them, these are short-term, paid, individually completed projects. These are not semester-long experiences. These are not team-based case studies. These are not make-believe simulations. These are real paid professional projects that allow these college students and recent grads, these learners, to really demonstrate their skills and build their network with the goal of ultimately finding the right full-time role. And getting paid is key. It is at the bottom of the list whenever we ask students why they complete these projects. It's at the bottom of the list. It's those top 3 things that you can see on this slide, but it's vital. It's vital because it allows accessibility. It's vital for those students, as Kristen said, who have other commitments or rely on part-time roles, et cetera, et cetera. It's also vital because the perception of fairness. Students view it as fair. They don't like the idea of being asked to do a 5 or 10 or 20-hour assignment and not be paid for it, even if it's a simulation. It feels unfair. I have to go complete that just for the chance of maybe interviewing. They want to be treated fairly. So let's try to get to some of the questions, Kristen, and then we'll finish up with some action items. I always like action items. I like things people can take away afterwards. So let's go through. I know there were some in the chat and in the Q&A. So one of the questions, can micro internships be an option for alumni and career center, or I'm sorry, alumni and career changers, or those looking to build new skills or experiences in the new area? Kristen, go ahead.
I love that question. And yes, definitely. Because yeah, it's something we see actually more often than we maybe surprisingly, but it's that students are doing these at all stages of their academic journey. We've had students complete micro internships even before they matriculate. So they hear about it during orientation, summer orientation before coming on campus. And then we hear it, the students that come back from their summer internship and who, like Jeffrey, you shared, who thought, wow, I thought I was going to be a public accountant, or yeah, but that's not what I want to do. And we're glad of that, Jeffrey. You're much better in your current role. And so what I think is good for folks that have an aha, because that's what this experiential education is all about, right? Is we're not going to find the perfect fit necessarily. when you're doing. And so having a variety of different options. Jeffrey likes to use this micro internships are kind of like dating analogy where you try
Wait,
lots
wait,
of
wait.
different
It was
things.
not,
Please,
it was not my metaphor. It
fair
was
enough.
less creepy when it wasn't an old married guy like me. It was a college student's metaphor, but continue. I'm sorry, Kristen.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'll just point to one student in particular that had a similar aha as Jeffrey and who used micro internships as a way to do a pivot in the very, very tail end of their academic journey. And so if you're curious to hear, this particular student ended up doing a micro internship with Netflix that ended up giving them some great resumeable experience to end up not with Netflix in his case, because it found an opportunity that was an even better fit for the particular goals that they were going for. So, but yeah, great example. I think it's also important, again, those of you thinking about non-traditional learners who may not be recruiting or are interested in hiring the 18 to 22 traditional age college student persona, because there's a lot of folks, as we read in the Chronicle and Inside Higher Ed and all those places, that are saying that the average college student is much older, that needs that flexibility. A lot of them are parents. A lot of them have done other things before going on to pursue their degree. And so those are populations that really desperately need that flexibility.
Yeah. Again, completely agree. It's the micro internship is like going on a date. The summer internship is like getting engaged. And I don't think any of us would have gotten engaged without ever going on a date before or several dates. And the full-time role is getting married. And again, it's important because when you're thinking about the lower commitment of a date, it means that student is more open to that project in the agriculture space or hospitality or manufacturing that they might not be ready to sign up to the full summer internship for. And then mutually to figure out it's the right fit. Or also make sure sort of it is the right fit. I thought I wanted to be an accountant. If I could have just done a project, I would have realized a lot earlier that it wasn't the right path. And as Kristen said, since I believe 1 + 1 can equal 7, it certainly wasn't. Um, a couple other questions that have come through, and I want to make sure we hit these. Have you heard of companies asking finalists to complete a project as part of the interview itself and then paid through Parker Dewey? Yes, all the time. There's the quote unquote keep warm strategy that we're seeing, or test drive strategy. Again, it's a different flavor. And that's the beauty of this, is there's no single right answer. The Smith nephew example that Kristen shared wasn't my idea, wasn't Kristen's idea. It came from Smith nephew. And it came from a conversation the head of campus recruiting was having with folks in the sales team, where the sales team was talking about how it'd be great to get this outside perspective, and it would be great to get insights on a candidate earlier in the process before they went through the X month training. It was their idea. Same thing with the question that Beth asked. Again, we're seeing that more and more. We've interviewed or we've met with X number of people. Let's give them real projects, or using it before the interview. Let's use it before we start making that time commitment of hours and hours. And this goes to the comments earlier from Arturo. Think about how much more effective an interview is if Jeff may have done even just one project with your company beforehand, or even better, 2 or 3. You can dig in on what it was that you liked, why the company's the right fit. And if Jeff had done micro internships for other companies as well, he can also convey why he's certain it's the right fit, why he doesn't have that grass is greener issue, because he has something to compare and contrast with. So we're seeing a ton of that, Beth, and we'd be happy to talk offline to go through more specifics. There was a question in the Q&A about the number of students ghosting and if it's increased or decreased over the past 3, 6, 9, or 12 months. Kristen, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that is coming up, and something that I know within our partnership team that we are sharing with the university partners that, if that happens, I think it's when we talk to students, we directly reach out to them and ask them, hey, what's going on? And what we're hearing from the students is oftentimes very, wow, I'm so sorry. I ignored an email. Unfortunately, that's something that I think a lot of students fall victim to, if you will. And it's a good
Yeah.
aha teachable moment for them, that's not going to fly, yeah, with the micro internship, and it's not going to fly with any step
But
of the
what
hiring
about,
process. Mhm.
yeah, and I think part of the question was also though in the full-time roles. I mean, what are we hearing about students ghosting or reneging on full-time roles?
Yeah, I think that was actually a question even before when folks were first registering about that. And yeah, I think that's something that's occurring now because there are, and maybe in the next few months, maybe less so because there are some different data points on the hiring market right now. But certainly, when the economy is stronger and students have lots of options, that does go up. That's something I know I've seen throughout my career and the different ebbs and flows of the job market. And that's where, again, building these relationships, authentic relationships with these students is so critical. They'll be far less likely to ghost and or renege and or any of those things if they actually do have that company that really truly has demonstrated that they want them to be part of the team.
And there's two other things I would add. One, we're continuing to hear from employers that are very, very nervous about renegs for this summer's interns or full-time hires. And again, I'm not going to go into sort of the student behavior side or opining on that. The companies are scared. And we're hearing a lot of companies starting to use these short-term projects as a quote unquote plan B. If they have open seats for this summer's internships or full-time roles, we're also seeing a lot of organizations happy that they already have this pipeline of engaged candidates from projects that were completed throughout the past year or two. So again, company ABC, this one I can't disclose the name of, has done hundreds of micro internships over the past several years. When they have an open summer internship or full-time role, their first pass is going through those students who have already, one, completed the micro internships because they've seen them in action, but two, who've raised their hands and applied because these students are now engaged and have proactively expressed interest. And that's really powerful and really important. The other thing I can share is I think from the last survey, north of, I think it was well north of 95% of students who completed micro internships stayed at their full-time role upon graduation at least a year and a half, some massive number. So not only are they showing up, but they're sticking around because they know it's the right hire. It's sort of the complete antithesis of ghosting. And again, while I'm frustrated that it's not 100%, that 95% is certainly better when you think about the 55% of recent college grads who leave in the first year. So we know these experiences make a difference for a multitude of reasons, not the least of which is building those relationships with the companies, those authentic relationships. There was a question in here about seeing enough projects for students that came from someone on the university side. Yeah, the volume of micro internships offered for students overall ebbs and flows. So a student might see 20 micro internships. First of all, of those 20, 15 of those companies might be selecting 5, 10, 20, 30 different students to work on the project, similar to the Smith-Nephew example. Second, what we're seeing is as the universities become more engaged, we're seeing more organizations getting focused, where they are saying, we have a great relationship with Florida A&M, and we want to focus on building relationships with first and second year students. And they're posting projects just for the FAMU students. Or companies saying, we're really interested in engaging students that have ties to Nashville, Tennessee, because we're actively recruiting for that office. Now, yes, we're going to the local schools, we're going to Vanderbilt, we're going to University of Tennessee, but we also want to engage those students who have ties to Nashville who might be attending school elsewhere. So again, what a given student sees is somewhat dependent on where they go to school and other aspects of their background. One thing that we never allow, to be crystal clear, is we don't allow companies to make projects available only to students over a certain GPA or only a certain major. It goes against our belief that major and GPA don't predict the right hire. So again, I wanted to make sure I could answer that. Lisa asked a question, how many micro internships turn into multi-year internships and full-time positions? Um, the last survey we did, 96.1% of students who completed micro internships were professionally employed upon graduation, with over 80% coming from populations underrepresented in the workforce. So there's not sort of that selection set bias of it's just 3.9 GPAs from Ivy League institutions. 96.1%. Sometimes it's with the organization with which they do micro internships. Sometimes it's with a different one. Again, realizing someone's not the right fit or having them realize it's not the right fit is an okay outcome. Smith Nephew wasn't looking to hire 100% of the micro interns that they gave those opportunities to. They were using it as that audition. And we found when companies are doing that, not only does it improve hiring outcomes, it lowers their cost per hire 40 to 80%.
And that also I want to put a button on is for another question from another Lisa is micro internships, the statistics that Jeffrey just named is irrespective of the student's major. So we see students that are, and you're speaking to two business majors, that's just ironic, but you got folks who are more in the majors that sound like job titles, like business, HR, and all those lovely things. But then even your liberal arts students, your English majors, your psychology majors, your philosophy majors, etc. We find that micro internships are a fantastic way for those students to explore, to kind of hone in on some of those skills that they're developing, those critical thinking skills, those writing skills, the written communication skills in general. They're just really do a fantastic job of developing those skills, and then to put them into a context of a problem faced by a real organization. And so it's a really great way for them to just conceptualize that. And that's also for those companies who may not have the English majors on their radar for whatever reason. This is a fantastic way, very low stakes way for them to, I said, again, mutually audition. Is that student that is studying the liberal arts? Gosh, I didn't realize that they are exactly what I'm looking for XYZ type of opportunity.
Well, and a great example of that, I think about, Kristen, the program you run with Swarthmore University.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a great, and it goes back a little bit to the question before. Swarthmore University actually had some funding, and they are funding micro internships for their students to complete on behalf of their alumni and parents of their current students. They are funding this. They're very focused on those students. Again, as they continue to welcome more new students into the Swarthmore family from different backgrounds, et cetera, they're finding how important it is for those students to get experience. And again, they're liberal arts students. And it's a great win-win. And while those projects are obviously only available to current Swarthmore students, back to Stephanie's question, it's a great example of where they're thriving and where these liberal arts students are having, again, great experiences in demonstrating skills. It's also worth mentioning that, and I know Kristen shared the NACE competencies earlier, the skills that employers most want align so well to the skills being taught to liberal arts students: communication, problem solving, crafting an argument, the same way a lot of skills tie to student athletes: the teamwork, the leadership, the coachability. That's one of the key attributes of these projects. It helps the students most effectively demonstrate those skills that are vital for employers, but often find difficult to assess. Another question about micro internships: who's funding them? The vast majority are funded by employers. There are a series of programs that take place where it's a third party, like the Swarthmore example I gave. There was a great article on a program being funded by University of Delaware. I think the article was last week, about how a student did a micro internship through that program for a local nonprofit. Trinity College outside of Chicago is funding a program for students studying entrepreneurship. One of the foundations is funding a program tied to HBCU and HSI students. There's a Strata program tied to Kansas. So there's definitely a variety of those. But the beauty of it, in all these cases, we're seeing it translate to the employer-funded programs, because employers are using this to dip their toe in the water if they have not offered micro internships before. And they're seeing how effective it is. And they're realizing it's a key part of the campus recruiting strategy. And that's probably a good segue to some action items. As I said, I promised you that you would be able to leave with some takeaways, some actionable things you can do that don't require $100,000 check or some massive lift. Things you could do today, things you could do before this week ends. First of all, evaluate the recruiting timing and outcomes. Look at your data. Are you engaging students early enough? Are you getting students from a breadth of backgrounds beyond the focus schools? Are your strategies driving the interest? Are there things you can do to amplify that? Again, back to the career fair example. How can you turbocharge your career fair? Can you drive more interest at the booths if you're offering these projects? Can you keep the students warmer by using short-term projects to keep them engaged? The second is assessing your brand on campus. Again, recognize the strengths and limitations of your brand, whether it's a well-known company, as I alluded to before, like Nike, where every college student has heard. Is that causing some students not to apply? Or the student who doesn't apply for the full-time role at Microsoft because they think Microsoft's only hiring technologists. They don't realize the breadth of the roles. Or if your company is smaller or less well-known, again, there's great opportunities to continue to enhance that employer brand that are accessible. And then experiment with low lift approaches. Again, skills-based hiring is a very hot topic. I know it's a key topic at SHRM taking place in a couple of weeks here in Chicago. Here's a way to try skills-based hiring, to see it in action, to see it in a way that doesn't require completely revamping all of the job descriptions and completely changing everything. It's a way to dip your toe in the water, see skills-based hiring in action, and continue to enhance your early career recruiting. Kristen, do you want to talk about some of the insights for the schools?
Yeah, and this is really, really timely. So I applaud all of you for taking an hour of your day because I know this is the time where most of you are in the midst of celebrating commencement and all of those end of the year things, gathering the data, but also strategically planning. Whether you're a school or an HR, now is a big, big time for that. So while you are setting your goals for the upcoming academic year or wrapping this one up and evaluating the efficacy of different programs, share these insights with whoever it is that's interfacing on your team, with students, with whoever it is that's interfacing with companies, so that they can benefit from what what you're hearing from today. And particularly, I want to put an extra note on the employer piece because having an interface with schools and also with lots and lots of companies, the companies, for those of you who work in career services, they are looking for you to share to them what is the best way to engage your students. So this data is super, super relevant and actionable for those organizations. And I encourage you, share the full report that we're going to share with you after today's call so that you can, again, let folks know and benefit from these real world insights. Like from just a few weeks ago, we surveyed these students that they can really take and learn from. And then, the last piece is just looking at your different programming and are there opportunities to engage additional resources, to reprioritize, to juggle some things around so that it is, again, more in line with serving what the students want, and all students, not just the students that have been participating day in and day out with all the other programs. We're really excited. There's a lot of updates coming up in the next few months here in Parker Dewey. I'm just, for those of you, again, engaging with our university partners in particular, do want to encourage you, give you a little sneak peek of a session coming up in a few weeks. Because again, lots going on here to just try. We've heard what these students want. We've heard what the schools are looking for. And so we're really excited about these next few months, some big things coming up.
And for those of you on the employer side who are involved in campus recruiting, there's a program wrapping up in the middle of next month being funded by the Frederick DeLuca Foundation. They're funding 100% of the cost of the micro internships for students from selected institutions. And we actually mapped out some that are specifically aligned to campus recruiting. You want to see how your job descriptions compare to other companies. You want to interview last year's summer interns and write an article or create social media content or the like. You should take advantage of this program. It's a great way, if you haven't used micro internships yet, to dip your toe in the water, and we'll share that link in a moment. Thank you, Kristen. With that, thank you so much for the time. Really appreciate the amazing support from everyone who's on the call. Hopefully these insights are useful and enlightening. I know I found them incredibly interesting as I was reading the report. We'll be sharing a summary of the recording itself, and the full report over the next day or so. As always, if you have questions, please feel free to reach out to us. One of the reasons I know Kristen and I both love doing this is it's one of those places that creates a win-win. Helps the students, helps the universities, helps the employers. So we're obviously passionate about this. So thank you again for taking time and for all of the support. And please let us know how we can be helpful. With that, enjoy the rest of your week.